A poor kid walked into the richest boardroom in Manhattan. "I can fix this myself," he said, staring at their billion-dollar mistake. The CEO laughed in his face. But when the boy erased the equation, his smile died forever. Nobody in the conference room noticed when the door opened. The 52nd floor of Sterling Capital Management was a monument to wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like a throne surveying a kingdom. The boardroom contained leather chairs worth more than most families earned in months, Italian marble floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers above, and a massive whiteboard stretching across an entire wall, currently covered in mathematical equations representing a $3 billion investment algorithm. Richard Castellano stood at the head of the conference table, radiating the absolute confidence of a man who'd never been wrong. At 56, he was the CEO and majority owner of Sterling Capital, one of Wall Street's most ruthless success stories. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit cost more than a used car, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist could have fed a family for half a year. He'd built his empire through brilliant analytics and an unwillingness to tolerate weakness in any form. "Gentlemen," Richard said, gesturing toward the whiteboard with casual authority, "this algorithm will revolutionize predictive investment. When we launch, Sterling Capital will own the market for the next decade." 5 executives in expensive suits nodded with practiced enthusiasm. Among them was Dr. Marcus Webb, the senior analyst who'd spent 15 years earning Richard's trust through meticulous, careful work. Even Marcus seemed excited about this project, the crown jewel of 18 months of development and $3 million in research. "Marcus, walk them through the final calculations," Richard ordered. Marcus approached the board, pointing to different sections of the complex formula. "The model integrates 12 variables: market volatility indices, consumer confidence patterns, international trade fluctuations." The door opened quietly. A woman in a maintenance uniform slipped inside, carrying a bucket and cleaning supplies. She moved along the wall like a ghost, trying to be invisible in the way service workers learn to be around important people. Helena had worked in this building for 3 years, cleaning offices after everyone went home, existing in the margins of other people's success. Behind her, a small figure appeared in the doorway. The boy was maybe 10 years old, thin and serious looking, with dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were clean but worn, a shirt with a carefully stitched patch on the elbow, pants slightly too short, sneakers held together with super glue and determination. His hands showed dirt under the fingernails from helping his mother clean buildings after school. Noah wasn't supposed to be here. His school had called that morning saying he was sick, and Helena couldn't afford to miss another shift. She'd hidden him in the break room with homework and a sandwich, but he'd wandered off. Helena's eyes went wide with panic when she saw him in the doorway. She gestured frantically for him to leave, her weathered face showing the terror of someone who knew how easily she could lose the job that kept her children fed. But Noah wasn't looking at his mother. He was staring at the whiteboard. His eyes moved across the equations with intense focus, his lips moving slightly, as if reading something fascinating. His brow furrowed. He took a step forward, then another, pulled toward the board like it was calling him. "Excuse me," one of the junior executives said sharply, noticing the interruption. "This is a closed meeting." "I'm so sorry, sir," Helena whispered, her accent thick with embarrassment. She grabbed Noah's arm. "He leaves now." But Noah didn't move. He stood frozen, studying the whiteboard with an expression that looked almost like concern. Richard Castellano turned to see what had interrupted his meeting. When his eyes landed on Noah, this poor kid with patches on his clothes and dirt under his nails, his face transformed into a smile that wasn't kind at all. It was the smile of a predator who just found unexpected entertainment. Well, Richard said, his voice carrying that particular edge of amused superiority that made everyone pay attention. "What do we have here? A little mathematician?" Laughter rippled through the room. 6 men in suits that cost more than Helena made in 3 months, all turned to stare at this child, who clearly didn't belong in their world. "Maybe he's here to check our work," one executive said, grinning. "Should we ask him to review our algorithm?" Another added mockingly. Helena's face burned with shame. She'd accepted being invisible, accepted cleaning up after people who never saw her as human. But watching these men mock her son, her brilliant, sensitive boy, was different. It hurt in a way that made it hard to breathe. Please, Helena said quietly, pulling at Noah's arm. We go now. No, wait, Richard interrupted, his smile growing wider. He was enjoying this. I want to hear what the genius thinks. Come here, kid. You understand what you're looking at? Noah finally looked away from the whiteboard to meet Richard's eyes. In that moment, two worlds collided. Richard saw a nobody, someone so beneath his notice that acknowledging him was an act of charity, a source of amusement for a boring Tuesday morning. What Richard didn't see was the quality of intelligence in Noah's dark eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with expensive schools or advantages, the kind that simply existed, raw and undeniable. Sir, Noah said quietly, his young voice steady despite the fear he must have felt. There's a mistake in your equation. The laughter stopped like someone had cut power to the room. Richard's smile froze on his face. Several executives stopped mid-chuckle, confused by the sudden shift. What did you just say? Richard asked, his tone still light but with something dangerous underneath. The third variable, Noah said, looking back at the board. The coefficient is wrong. It's going to cause the whole model to fail. Absolute silence. Every person in that room stared at this 10-year-old child like he'd spoken in an alien language. A poor kid who probably went to an underfunded public school, whose mother cleaned toilets, was suggesting an error in an algorithm developed by some of the most expensive analytical minds in finance. Then Richard Castellano threw his head back and laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, genuine belly laugh that made him grip the edge of the conference table for support. His face turned red with the force of it. His eyes actually watered. Did everyone hear that? Richard gasped between laughs. The cleaning lady's kid found an error in our equation. He had to pause, overcome by another wave of amusement. The equation that cost us 18 months and $3 million, reviewed by 6 PhDs and dozens of analysts, and this little boy. Another laugh cut him off. This boy who probably can't even do long division claims we made a mistake. The other executives erupted. Some were genuinely amused by the absurdity. Others laughed because Richard was laughing, and survival at Sterling Capital meant matching the CEO's mood perfectly. One executive actually stood to point at Noah, doubled over with laughter. Does he even know what a coefficient is? Probably thinks it's something from a video game, another shouted. Helena was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She tugged desperately at Noah's arm, trying to pull him toward the door, away from this nightmare. But Noah pulled free from her grip and walked straight toward the whiteboard. His worn sneakers were silent on the expensive carpet. Helena called his name, her voice breaking with desperation. But Noah didn't stop. The executives watched with expressions ranging from amusement to disbelief to irritation that this entertainment was continuing. Noah reached the board and looked up at the equations towering above his small frame. Complex mathematical relationships that would intimidate most graduate students. But his eyes tracked across them with purpose, like he was reading a story only he understood. Oh, this is incredible, one executive said, pulling out his phone. We need to record this. Let him continue, Richard said, still grinning widely. I want to see where this goes. Please, kid, show us this mistake. Enlighten us. The word enlighten dripped with such exaggerated sarcasm that several men chuckled again. Noah reached for the marker in the tray below the whiteboard. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He understood he was violating invisible social rules, crossing boundaries that children like him weren't supposed to cross. But he also understood something else. This equation was wrong. When Sterling Capital used this algorithm, real people would lose money. Maybe their retirement savings, maybe their homes, maybe their children's futures. His mother had taught him that staying silent when you saw something wrong was the same as helping the wrong happen. Noah turned to face the room full of powerful men. I can fix this myself, he said quietly. Then he reached up and erased an entire line of the equation. The laughter died instantly. Richard's smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. His face went from amused to shocked to furious in 2 seconds. What do you think you're doing? Richard's voice came out sharp, dangerous. But Noah had already turned back to the board. His small hand moved across the whiteboard with surprising confidence, replacing the erased section with something different. His handwriting was childish and unsteady, but the numbers and symbols themselves were precise, deliberate, purposeful. The executives watched in stunned silence as this poor kid, this nobody, rewrote their $3 billion algorithm. "Stop him," one executive said, starting to rise. "He's destroying—" "Wait," Marcus Webb said suddenly, sharply. The senior analyst had moved closer to the board, his eyes following Noah's corrections with growing intensity. His face had gone pale. Everyone just— "Wait." Something in Marcus's tone made everyone freeze. He wasn't someone who spoke without reason. When Marcus Webb said to wait, there was always a good reason. Noah finished writing and stepped back, marker still in hand. He turned to face the room full of adults, all staring at him with expressions ranging from rage to confusion to, in Marcus's case, something that looked like horror. The boy's voice was steady when he spoke. "The coefficient was wrong. You needed to adjust for temporal lag in the data correlation. Without that correction, your model would show initial success, maybe for a few weeks, but then accumulated error would compound. The whole system would start giving false predictions right when people trusted it most. That's when real damage happens." The silence that followed wasn't like before. This wasn't the silence of amusement or mockery. This was the silence of people whose reality had just cracked. Marcus Webb stared at the board, his face growing paler by the second. His eyes moved from the original equation to Noah's correction and back again. His lips moved silently, working through the mathematics in his head. "This is ridiculous," Richard said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. He looked at Marcus, waiting for confirmation that this was all nonsense. "Marcus, tell me this child hasn't just—" "Sir," Marcus interrupted, and everyone in the room heard the shake in his voice. He turned to face Richard, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "Sir, we need to run immediate verification on this." "What are you saying?" Richard demanded. Marcus swallowed hard, looking between the board and his CEO. "I'm saying, the boy might be right." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Richard Castellanos' face went through several colors, red, then white, then red again. Around the table, executives looked at each other with dawning horror as the implications sank in. This poor kid, this nobody who'd wandered in from the hallways, had potentially just found a catastrophic flaw in their flagship project. A flaw that 6 PhDs and 24 analysts had missed. A flaw that would have cost billions. Helena stood by the door, tears still streaming down her face. But now they were different tears. She looked at her son standing by that massive whiteboard, marker in hand, facing down a room full of powerful men who'd been laughing at him 60 seconds ago. And she saw what they were only beginning to see. Noah wasn't just smart. He was extraordinary. Richard Castellano opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in decades, he had absolutely no idea what to say. The boy who wasn't supposed to be there, who should have been invisible, who they'd mocked and laughed at, had just changed everything. For several seconds, nobody moved. The conference room, usually filled with the confident voices of men who controlled billions, had become a vacuum of sound. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to have disappeared, leaving only the scratching of Noah's marker against the whiteboard as he continued writing. Richard Castellano stood frozen at the head of the table, his brain struggling to process what Marcus Webb had just said. The boy might be right. Those 4 words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. This was a poor kid who'd wandered in with his cleaning lady mother, a child who probably went to some underfunded public school in the Bronx or Queens, someone so far removed from their world that he might as well have been from another planet. And yet Marcus, careful, meticulous Marcus who never spoke without absolute certainty, had just suggested that this child had found an error that 6 PhDs and an entire team of analysts had missed. "Marcus," Richard said, his voice tight with forced calm, "you need to explain what you mean, right now." But Marcus wasn't listening. He'd moved closer to the whiteboard, standing just behind Noah, watching as the boy continued making corrections. Marcus's hand trembled as he pulled reading glasses from his pocket and put them on, leaning in to study the modified equation more carefully. Noah finished writing and stepped back, setting the marker down in the tray. His small hand left a smudge on the pristine whiteboard. He turned to face the room again, and for the first time since he'd started writing, he looked scared. Not of what he'd done, but of what would happen next. Helena remained by the door, one hand pressed against her mouth, tears still streaming down her weathered face. She wanted to grab her son and run, to escape this room full of powerful men before something terrible happened. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood rooted in place, watching her 10-year-old boy face down the kind of people who could destroy their lives with a phone call. The temporal lag coefficient, Marcus whispered, more to himself than anyone else. His finger traced Noah's corrections on the board. He adjusted for data correlation across time periods. That's exactly what we missed. What are you talking about? Richard demanded, his voice rising. Several other executives had stood up now, moving closer to the board, trying to understand what was happening. Marcus turned to face Richard, and everyone in the room could see genuine fear in the senior analyst's eyes. In 15 years at Sterling Capital, Marcus Webb had never looked afraid. Concerned, yes. Cautious, always, but never afraid. Sir, the algorithm we've been developing, the foundation of our entire predictive model, has a fundamental flaw. Marcus's voice shook as he spoke. The coefficient we use for variable 3 assumes that historical market patterns will repeat with consistent timing. But that's not how markets actually work. Of course that's how markets work, one of the other executives interrupted. We've built our entire career on pattern recognition. Patterns repeat, Marcus said, but not on a fixed timeline. There's temporal variance, lag time between cause and effect, that shifts based on external factors. Our model treats time as a constant, but it's actually a variable. Without adjusting for that, he trailed off, his face going even paler. Without adjusting for what? Richard pressed. Marcus swallowed hard. Without that adjustment, our algorithm would work perfectly for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. It would predict market movements with stunning accuracy. We'd gain massive trust from clients, probably attract billions in new investments. And then, he paused, looking at Noah with something between horror and awe. And then the accumulated error would compound. The predictions would start failing, slowly at first, then catastrophically. By the time we realized what was happening, we'd have invested billions based on false projections. The room erupted. That's impossible, one executive shouted. We've tested this algorithm for months. In simulated environments, Marcus said quietly. We haven't live-tested it against real market conditions. We were planning to launch next month with actual client money. The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy fog. They'd been weeks away from implementing an algorithm that would have catastrophically failed, potentially destroying the firm and wiping out billions in client investments. All because of an error in a single coefficient. An error that a 10-year-old boy had spotted in less than 2 minutes. Richard Castellano felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. He was a man who prided himself on always being the smartest person in the room, on seeing angles others missed, on staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. That reputation, that certainty, was the foundation of everything he'd built. And this child had just exposed him as blind. This is absurd, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus, you're telling me that a child with no education, no credentials, no experience, just saw something that our entire team missed? Yes, sir, Marcus said simply. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Another executive, James Bradford, the head of quantitative analysis, pushed forward to look at the board. He was younger than most of the others, mid-30s, with a reputation for aggressive confidence. He'd been one of the loudest in mocking Noah. Let me see this, James said, pulling his phone out and opening a calculation app. His fingers flew across the screen as he worked through the mathematics, checking Noah's corrections against the original formula. The room waited in tense silence. Helena inched closer to Noah, wanting to protect him but afraid to draw attention. Noah stood very still, his young face showing exhaustion now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked like what he was, a small, scared child who'd just done something far beyond his years. James's face went from skeptical to confused, to horrified in the span of 30 seconds. No, he whispered. No, that can't be. What? Richard demanded. James looked up from his phone, his face pale. He's not just right about the coefficient. He's right about everything. The temporal lag adjustment, the correlation variance, the compound error projection. It's all correct. And if we'd launched with the original formula,